Hello guys, this is Dark Fox Sage 2 and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Switched His Soul with Sakura Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. The Sound Nin impatiently looked up from where he had been playing a game of tic-tac-toes in the dust against himself. You're late. He didn't bother to disguise the anger and impatience in his voice. The other Sound Nin winced and shuffled his feet guiltily. Where are the others? You did find them, didn't you? Despite his immense bulk, he still managed to look frightened of the Sound Nin he stood before, who rose from the dust with his eyes narrowed viciously and his body quivering with rage. Sort of. What's that supposed to mean? It means I sort of found them. And what does it mean that you sort of found them? Again, the much larger Sound Nin nervously shuffled his feet and refused to meet his teammate's eyes. Well, when I say I sort of found them, it's because I did find them, just in, bits and parts. Slowly, the other Sound Nin's face changed expressions, going from angry impatience to disbelief, and finally becoming deep suspicion. What happened? I can show you. No. We're not to lose sight of Sasuke-kun. The larger Sound Nin shrugged. Yes, but Orochimaru-sama also said that we were not to be spotted by anyone except Sasuke-kun, and that was only if we were to speak to him. Somehow, being mauled to pieces doesn't fit into our orders. Mauled to pieces? It looked as if an animal had attacked and ate half their bodies, except I didn't see any animal prints. It was at our campsite, and they must have been caught unaware because the playing cards were scattered. The ground was scuffed where they must have struggled, and there were square peg-like holes in the dirt. Square peg holes? I don't know of any animal around here with square paws, the Sound Nin added, mostly to himself in the same manner as someone who turned the issue over and over in his mind. I see, the other Sound Nin said darkly. He pressed his lips together in thought, and then said, "Stay here. I'll investigate the bodies. No animal could possibly have beaten two ninjas with level 2 seals." The trunk nestled in its bed of leaves and yawned, its lid opening wide and revealing many rows of sharp teeth. Naruto vaguely heard a door open. Not used to visitors entering his little apartment when he was sleeping, he sat upright suddenly and felt the blood rush from his brain. He blinked groggily at the vast amount of pink in the room and wondered what happened before the events of the day before came scurrying back to his mind. His eyes focused on the door and he saw a thin little man, blinking owlishly, carefully approaching his bed. With a yelp, Naruto flung his covers back to cover Sakura, or rather, from his visitor's point of view, a half-naked Naruto in the same bed as Sakura, from view. Hi, he said nervously, a hand self-consciously behind his head. Good morning. The man had a small fringe of thin brown hair that clung desperately to his skull, his deep green eyes were sunken in his head, and he was the same height and build as Sakura. Good morning, sweetie, he said, still blinking owlishly. I know we would be leaving too early in the morning to see you, but I just wanted to peek in on you. He rubbed his eyes. Have you seen my glasses? He asked absently as he glanced around the room, squinting desperately. No. Oh, your mother and I will be leaving for your aunt's. The poor thing is going through another one of her nervous breakdowns. Oh, it was an inquiring oh, the sort of person makes when they know what was going on but said it anyway to keep the conversation flowing. Naruto had no idea what else to say without incriminating himself for odd behavior. Yes. So I came in here to peek in on you. Have you seen my glasses? He asked again. No. Naruto frowned. Do you remember where you last saw them? I remember placing them in the living room, but sometimes you or your mother moved them. And I wanted to peek in on you because we were leaving early. Have you seen my glasses? Naruto jumped as he felt a hand tug on his pajama's legs. He looked down to see Sakura's hand poking out of the covers, he could see her eyes half hidden under a fold, and she gestured him close. As Papa Haruno turned his back to Naruto and stared dumbly about, Naruto bent low to Sakura. She pulled him close so her lips brushed his ear. Papa is absent-minded and blind as a bat, she whispered softly. You need to direct him out of the room, and keep telling him that he has to leave. She dropped her hand and burrowed deeper under the covers. Naruto, nervously rubbing the back of his hand, carefully approached Papa Haruno. Nay, Papa, he said brightly, Mother probably needs you for the packing. You do need to go. The man looked at Naruto in surprise. Go. Where? To see Auntie. Oh, yes. Because she's having a nervous breakdown. We'll probably be gone a week. Stay out of trouble and keep the house clean, you know how it is if you create a mess. Yes, yes. Naruto slipped an arm around Papa Haruno's and carefully guided him to the door. Right over here, Papa. Have you seen my glasses? Papa Haruno asked, squinting at her. And did I tell you we were leaving today? Mother has them, Naruto said tiredly. I'll see you when you come back, he added as he opened the door and carefully pushed Sakura's father out of it. Have a safe trip, he added, closing the door. There, he said with satisfaction as he walked back to the bed where Sakura poked her head upward, parents are taken care of. Your mom popped in yesterday evening to say goodbye to me. Yeah, I'm glad they're leaving, Sakura said softly, because they won't be here to suspect any odd behavior on my part. Oh, because they dote on me, they'd recognize if I'm not being me, although if that did happen, you could always say that you happen to be going through a phase. They usually accept that. But we won't be in these bodies for very long, Naruto said sternly. Just you wait. Kakashi-sensei will know what to do. There was a long pause as they mused over that. Or someone will, Naruto added as an afterthought. Yeah, Sakura stood up, pulling the cover around herself. I need to visit the little lady's room, she muttered as she stumbled unsteadily to the bathroom. She tottered to a halt when Naruto snickered. I hope not, Naruto-kun, he said, emphasizing every syllable in his name. She glared over her shoulder at him, and he gave her a bright smile, trying not to wince at the swollen forehead and the purple and black bruises livid against his skin. At least the cut had already healed from last night. I have enough problems with my reputation without someone adding, pervert, to the list. Sakura's eyes were angry little slits. Oh, you don't need my help for that, she muttered snidely, turning and continuing her clumsy trip to the bathroom. Oi, what did that mean? Naruto waited until the bathroom door clicked shut behind Sakura before he went roaming through Sakura's room in search of a dress to wear. Something besides pink. He had absolutely no idea why Sakura had so much of it. What she clearly needed was something bright and bold, like orange. He poked through her underwear drawer. These are certainly bright, he thought to himself as he held up a pair of sunshine yellow panties. Naruto couldn't explain why he felt so strangely energized. The sun was barely up and only a few birds chirped in the lawn beyond the house. Naruto had never thought of himself as a morning person, or an evening person. Sleep was something he did when it needed to be done. While it was certainly earlier than he was used to, he was too wide awake now to go back to sleep. After sifting through more of Sakura's clothes, Naruto finally emerged from the depths of her closet with a white tennis outfit that, while it was not made of the same durable material as his own jumpsuit or Sakura's bull's-eye pink dress, was still roomy enough to jump around in. He had just finished dressing in it when Sakura entered the room. She still had the covers wrapped around her form, and she stumbled across the room to her bed, collapsing on top of it as soon as she reached it. She pulled her legs up and buried her face in the pillow. My head hurts, she muttered against it. She pressed one hand against her skull directly behind her ear. Sakura. The bedroom door burst open and a flurry of purple clothes and blonde hair plowed into the room, the door slamming into the wall. Sakura winced and burrowed deeper under her covers as Ino descended upon Naruto. This is a great, grand day, Ino declared loudly, her smile clearly forced as she threw an arm around Naruto's shoulders. We were assigned a special mission together and I came here bright and early. She smiled at Sakura, her teeth sparkling, before it faded into a frown. Why are you up so early? She grumbled, clearly resentful at not having disturbed Sakura's sleep. I felt like it, Naruto replied truthfully. Sakura. Mother Haruno's voice drifted into the open room from where she called downstairs. Your father and I are leaving. If Ino-chan hasn't had breakfast, make some for her and don't forget to do the dishes. More faintly, Naruto could hear Papa Haruno's voice. Dear, have you seen my glasses? They're on top of your head. Oh, yes. How did they get there? Did we say goodbye to Sakura? Yes. Now get your skinny little rear into gear, daylight's burning. Why yes, dear, off to Enchan's, we go. Ino shook her head and leaned close to Sakura, her hand cupped around her mouth to whisper a secret. I still maintain how proud I am that you are still normal in comparison with your parents. You sure you aren't adopted? I like them, Naruto said defensively. Despite their funny little quirks and idiosyncrasies, Sakura's parents deeply loved and cared well for their daughter, which was more than what Naruto could say he had. For just a moment, last night and this morning, he had been part of a loving family. Yes, well, it is amazing. Ino walked over to the bed. Now that they're gone and since Asuma-sensei told me to be here at 5 in the morning so he could discuss mission details, I'm going to sleep here cause I don't believe he's going to show up until 7. With a toss of her head and a daring smile sent to Naruto, she collapsed on the bed. Off. Ino was immediately booted off the bed with one vicious kick from Sakura. What? Ino stared in shock as Naruto popped out of Sakura's bed and glared viciously at her. The covers fell down around Sakura's waist, revealing her current state of undress. I've got a headache, Sakura muttered, rolling over and pulling the covers over herself again. Don't need fat asses to contribute to it. Why you're Naruto? No. Sakura drawled sarcastically. I'm actually Sasuke using a clever henge just in case Sakura's parents catch me. What? Ino jumped to her feet and stared at Sakura. You're 13 years old. That's too young to be doing anything. Naruto gazed at Ino, puzzled, as Sakura turned away from the others, stiffening and blushing a deep red. Doing what? Ino slapped her forehead, and then swiftly turned to Sakura, who was trying to hide her red face by covering it with her arms. Wait, you're kidding, right? She laughed nervously. I mean, you really aren't Sasuke or Naruto, are you? That much is right, Sakura thought dryly through the pounding pain in her temples. The pain relievers she had taken in the bathroom hadn't begun working yet. I'm Naruto, she said in resignation. In body only. Ino wrinkled her nose. I hope you used protection, she said finally, clearly in disgust. Sakura sat straight up, ignoring the burning red that crossed her face again. What? She tumbled out of bed in her wild attempt to launch herself across the room for Ino's throat. How dare you, Ino pig? She tripped over the covers and smacked her forehead against the floor. Pain exploded through her head and she cried out, curling into a tight ball. Owie owie owie. Amidst the pain was the irritation and anger she felt towards Ino, ingrained from the bitter rivalry she had with Ino over Sasuke. Sasuke is mine. Ino crowed triumphantly as she posed dramatically and pointed a finger at Naruto, who watched in confusion. Because there's no way he would want a tainted girl like your. Kill her. Rage and hatred slammed into Sakura, her thoughts reeling in confusion and repulsion, overtaking and blending into her own hatred. A vision of a clawed hand gutting Ino flew through Sakura's mind and Sakura found herself sick to enjoy such a vision. Inner Sakura rose upward and slammed into the nine-tailed fox's presence. The two went down in a confused myriad of rage, terror, and sadistic laughter. If anyone is going to kill her, it's going to be me, you hear that, you flea-infested mongrel. Inner Sakura countered the vivid images of death with a scene closely resembling a child's comical chalk drawings of Sakura hitting Ino over the head with a frying pan. What did you call me? Snarling and clawing viciously at one another, Inner Sakura and the nine-tailed fox pushed themselves backwards into the recesses of Sakura's mind where she felt a sense of detachment. After a moment of blissful silence, she finally looked up at Ino, who still stood poised before Naruto with her hand in the air. Her hand was shaking and there was tension around Ino's eyes. Naruto crossed his arms before himself and closed his eyes as he usually did, nodding knowingly to himself. You can drop the act, Ino, he said. I didn't do anything. Ino sighed and dropped her hand. It flopped against her side and she seemed to wilt a bit. Naruto got hurt last night when he came over to ask me some questions about the mission he and I had yesterday. I made him stay here because I didn't want him roaming through the dark and knocking his head again. Ino stared at Naruto in silence, clearly mulling over his words. Her brow was furrowed in thought, and Sakura shook her head and silently cursed at Naruto's behavior, her own insult from earlier, and the pain caused from shaking her head. While not as smart as Sakura, Ino was an intelligent girl and knew Sakura's behavior enough to recognize when something was off. I see, she said finally. She turned and walked over to where Sakura was curled on the floor. Ino crouched down and, with her lips pursed tightly together, studied the bruising and healing cut on Sakura's forehead. She pried Sakura's eyes open and looked at them critically. Did you know your pupils are different sizes? Ino asked Sakura helpfully. And they aren't focusing. There's one eye looking directly at me and the other eye is staring off to the left. That would explain why I'm seeing two of you, Sakura thought absently. How hard did you hit your head? Ino drew back from Sakura, one hand pressed against her chin in thought. Considering how thick your skull is, that'd have taken one mighty blow. Tripped? She asked suddenly, her voice nearly a shout and her expression filled with suspicion and anger. So what really happened? You may have been able to fool forehead girl with that, but it won't work on me. She somehow managed to slip in a sneer amongst her facial expression. Sakura said nothing as she pressed a hand over her head and curled back into a ball again. I am someone in a lot of pain, she said in a near whisper, so could you keep it down a bit? My head really hurts. Confusion wiped the anger from Ino's face, and she looked dumbly at Sakura before looking toward Naruto for guidance. Naruto leaned against Sakura's bedroom wall, watching the interaction between the two, sort of female ninjas. He shrugged and tried to look nonchalant. Naruto is clumsy, he said quickly. You haven't seen him much, but he's a real klutz. The confusion became anger once more. Just how stupid do you take me to be? Your forehead should be wide enough for you to realize that I've seen Naruto fight and he's not a klutz. Naruto gazed at Ino in surprised silence, unsure if he could take that as a compliment. Well, it was dark, he said, and... Oh, never mind. Ino irritably waved Naruto's words away. I know something's going on, but neither of you are going to tell me the truth. So what? You and I have a mission, and I know I heard someone say you had to feed me breakfast. Since I'm no longer tired, I demand waffles. Sakura stirred and asked darkly, what makes you think you're going to get them? Ino didn't even look at Sakura. Because I'm the guest, and it's my prerogative to make demands on the hostess. The three ninjas stared at one another, glancing from face to face. Naruto's expression was one of confusion. Waffles? He had no idea how to make waffles. Now, if Ino had demanded ramen, he could do that, and Sakura's was pain-filled. Ino placed her hands on her hips and threw her head back again. An uncertain smile curved her lips but did not hide the worry in her eyes. Sakura recognized Ino's body language. Ino was willing to let bygones be bygones and move beyond this unpleasant experience with a happy distraction. Because Ino was looking at Naruto, who was looking at Sakura, Sakura nodded her head and then jerked it toward Ino. Naruto looked confused a moment more before understanding bloomed on his face. All right, he said. Sakura smiled, glad that she and Naruto were able to communicate without words and minimal body language. He turned about on his heel and marched for the open bedroom door. Ino followed closely behind, casting a mere inquiring glance to Sakura's direction. Since I don't know what sort of waffles you like, I'll just make you ramen. Ino froze in mid-step. You've got to be kidding me. Ooh, I know what's going on here, now. She jabbed an accusing finger at Naruto. This is henge, isn't it? So Naruto decided to become Sakura and Sakura decided to become Naruto. Hey, not a bad impression. You've got Sakura's forehead down to a T. She gave Naruto a thumbs up of approval. Naruto gulped nervously. Hench. Again. Well, no, I'm not Naruto. At least, not in the flesh. Oh. Ino crossed her arms before herself and looked over her shoulder at Sakura. Somehow, I don't believe that. Sakura decided to curl up in a ball again and moan, not at all faking, in pain. Doubt flashed across Ino's face for a moment. Look, what was it that Sakura had said would keep her parents from asking questions? Naruto grabbed Ino's upper arm and pulled her out into the hallway. Look, I'm going through, a phase. He spoke solemnly and with a dark vocal tone in the same manner that persons exchanged secrets with that served the purpose of barely providing even the barest hint of an explanation, but generally led to a subject change. A phase. Ino must have understood something, because she instantly looked sympathetic. I see. Ah, that explains it. Yes, you do usually act strange. She nodded her head knowingly, and Naruto fought not to look as confused as he felt. I see. Yes. Yes. And you and Naruto couldn't have possibly have done it under those conditions. Yes. She patted Naruto's shoulder, instantly caring, as if someone had riled some maternal instinct in her. Don't worry, we both know these phases just last a few days. Ino turned her back to Naruto then and walked toward the kitchen. Tell you what, I'll make breakfast, yeah, and I'll even make some for Naruto, and explain the mission to you. Naruto blinked in confusion and followed after, pausing only to glance in on Sakura, who waved him away from the pile of covers on the floor that she curled herself up in. As he followed Ino, who probably knew more of where the cooking ingredients for waffles were than he did, he couldn't help but hope someone out there was having as bad a morning as he. And when Ino had said, and you and Naruto couldn't have possible have done it under those conditions, what did she mean by it in those conditions? Becoming a girl certainly hadn't made it any easier in understanding what they thought. Behind him, Sakura was glad that Ino always found it easier to blame misbehavior on PMS. If it made Ino excuse Sakura's behavior as being uncharacteristic, more power to her. As for those people having just as bad a morning as Naruto and Sakura. What's this? Asuma cautiously poked at the thing that sat in the very middle of his plate. It didn't look too edible, being mostly pink flesh and about the same size as his thumb. His head was ducked low under the cloud of smoke that hung heavily beneath the ceiling, skimming his hair and lurking about like an ominous warning. Beside the trash can in the far corner was what was left of the fire alarm after it had been ripped from the wall and stomped on multiple times. It's sausage. Guy didn't look up from where he stood partially bent over the cooking stove. He and Asuma ignored Kurenai, who methodically pounded her forehead against the top of the kitchen table at which she and Asuma were seated. Is it supposed to be this undercooked? Asuma wondered as he speared the lump with his fork and studied it intensely. He nibbled the end of his cigarette in trepidation. Guy finally looked up from where he was watching the frying pan and the eggs burning within it. Why? Is it still moving? Kurenai froze in mid-pound as Asuma carefully placed the lump back on his plate and stood up, his upper body disappearing into the smoke. I just remembered a mission I have to set up for Sakura and Ino, he said, ignoring any effect of smoke on his lungs. He smiled at Kurenai through the smoke, who turned a murderous gaze upon Guy, and hoped he still had a place to sleep on her couch when he got back. He was going to have to make another inquiry at the realtor's office today, but dreaded the idea. Since Orochimaru's attack on Konoha, the number of homeless people had risen dramatically and available, still in One Piece realty was in high demand. But until Asuma could find, or even afford, another place to stay, Kurenai shouldn't grouch at him. It wasn't as if he were to blame for a certain legendary Sennin stopping Orochimaru's snakes by summoning a frog on top of his apartment complex. In the back of his mind, as he scurried along rooftops, toward the end of the village that had been unscathed from the fierce battle, to a house that sat beside the great wall amidst a sea of green trees and green lawns. Asuma vaguely hoped that Sakura would have some decent breakfast food. Behind him, the clouds of smoke billowed out of Kurenai's windows. Sakura lifted herself from the floor, braced an elbow against her bed, and pushed to stand upright. She swayed unsteadily on her feet, the floor beneath her rocking slightly. At least her headache was beginning to ease. Henge. It had taken Sakura some time to get used to being inside a body completely disproportionate to her own. Naruto hadn't been able to access and use her chakra. Of course he also didn't have the control that she had, the control that Kakashi had said was more advanced than both Naruto's and Sasuke's. But as much as Sakura wanted to think Henge was possible, as much as she wanted to believe that she had the ability to access Naruto's chakra, there was a bitter taste in her mouth as her mind swiftly ran through the instances she had seen Naruto use it. Aside from the fact he had far more than her, there remained the uncomfortable notion that she didn't have sufficient knowledge to do what Naruto did. Unlike Sakura, Naruto knew how to work with and use two different sources of chakra at a single time. She didn't. What if she accidentally accessed and used the nine-tailed fox's chakra? What if she accidentally used both and couldn't control either? Except, what if the reason Naruto couldn't use her chakra was because he had been trying to draw it from two different sources? If that were the case, it would explain why he couldn't use Henge. By trying to draw it from two different sources at once, he could get neither because of how different were the lines and depths between Sakura's chakra and his chakra. She had better control than he, so if she just tried to tap Naruto's personal source of chakra without dipping into the nine-tailed fox's supplies, then she wouldn't have the same problem as Naruto. Plagued with doubts, Sakura was too scared to venture forth and try anything. At least, not inside her house. Sakura loathed the idea of explaining to her parents why it blew up if she decided to use Henge and it came to that. When her concussion was cured, she would have to make her way outside the fort and practice in the solitude of the woods. For now, she had to leave her house and go back to Naruto's house for, she glanced down at herself, some clothes. No wonder Ino had taken it all the wrong way. Except now that the cover of darkness was gone, she couldn't run through the streets half naked. And she wasn't going to wear any of her clothes. Despite the fact that this was Naruto's body, she was the one occupying it, and she could never be able to live down the embarrassment of anyone seeing her, as Naruto, wearing a dress. That meant she have to raid her father's clothes, and that meant because he was so meticulous concerning his wardrobe and would instantly know if someone had been roaming through it, she would have to sift through the seasonal clothes stored in the attic. Papa! Sakura jumped as a fuzzy, fluff-filled creature landed on her shoulder. M-chan wound her tail around Sakura's neck and clung to the short, blonde hair. Papa! What are you doing here? Sakura asked. The stuffed monkey looked at her, and then glanced away. Followed, she said, one stuffed paw rubbing her head. Sakura laughed and shrugged. Ah, you're a good little monkey. She patted M-chan's head and made her way out of her bedroom. The stairs to the attic were in the far corner of the upstairs. The sound of soft arguing drifted over to where she stood, leaning slightly against the doorframe and waiting for the sense of dizziness to pass. M-chan looked at Sakura with human-like worry. No, you added too much salt. The recipe called for a dish. It said dash, you stupid forehead girl. Arg, are you sure you aren't Naruto in disguise? How can you be so smart at the academy and yet so stupid in the kitchen? You have no idea what I'm going through, so back off. Sakura turned away from the voices in worry. Naruto didn't have her intelligence and memory. This was never going to work, she pretending to be him and he pretending to be her. Not for 2 days, it wouldn't. She found herself making her way back to the bathroom. She stood before the mirror, not quite able to focus upon her features because her vision was still blurry. She folded her hands before herself and concentrated, closing her eyes to better visualize herself as Sakura. Henge, she cried, releasing the chakra. It washed and flowed through her, an overwhelming sensation of too much power at her own beck and call. It was slightly tainted with the malevolence of something darker, more immense, and infinitely stronger than herself. Instantly, she could feel the nine-tailed fox's presence rising to the surface, bloodlust washing through her and inner Sakura fruitlessly hurrying behind the nine-tailed fox to push it back down. She felt her body surge and shift, the ends of her fingers grow longer and her eyes bulge, all of which had never before happened when she used henge. Sakura abruptly stopped the flow of chakra. Its loss felt like a physical blow to the gut, and she gasped for breath as she gripped the edge of the bathroom sink and trembled in fear. Both the nine-tailed fox and inner Sakura were quiet, and hovered on the edge of her consciousness. But at least her head didn't ache anymore. Sakura's eyes flew open, and they were focused upon her image in the mirror above the bathroom sink and directly before her. Well, it was sort of her. Despite the pink hair, wide forehead, and red dress, Sakura still had Naruto's blue eyes and those annoying whisker-like markings on her face. There was no way anyone could think she wasn't Naruto poorly masquerading as herself. With a sigh, she released the layer of chakra that maintained the illusion and became Naruto once more. Naruto, who wore white boxers and no longer had ugly bruising on his forehead. Sakura leaned forward in awe and prodded her forehead. The bruising, pain, and concussion were all gone. All that remained is the light scar, and she had a feeling that that too would rapidly fade. Relieved at the absence of pain and her vision functioning correctly, Sakura left the bathroom for the attic. Unlike the one she had to clean with Naruto yesterday, her parents' attic was spick and span as the rest of the house. Papa made sure to sweep and dust it at least twice a month as Mother looked on, supervising as she usually did. Among the neatly stacked boxes, all of which were neatly labeled and had detailed lists of what was within the box pasted on the sides of the boxes where they could be read, Sakura found a box that said, Papa's Vacation Clothes. It gave a brief listing of shorts, shirts, sun hats, ties, socks, and a few other things that Sakura glanced over but didn't mentally register. She tugged the box free of its stack and placed it on the floor, then carefully pried the lid off and looked inside. No. No. This was just. She sighed. Well, it beat cross-dressing by a slight fraction. Besides, it was still early, so it was unlikely anyone she or Naruto knew would see her. From the box, she reluctantly removed the shirt, the shorts, and the gigantic straw hat. She gently pushed the box to the side so she knew which one she got the clothes from. They would have to be put back before her parents came home because, typical of them, they would immediately go on a cleaning spree, which meant everything would also be checked and rearranged. She pulled the shirt and shorts on and donned the straw hat. There. She was ready. M-chan jumped and landed on the brim of her straw hat. Papa. You can contribute to the disguise, Sakura told her. Now, come along. We've got to get back to Naruto's place before I'm spotted in this clown getup. She hurried out of the attic and to the outlanding's railing where she could see the corner of the kitchen. Sakura, Ino, she called, I'm going back to my place. Naruto looked around the kitchen's corner, his hair and white tennis outfit covered with white flour. His eyes widened at Sakura's state of dress, and she glared at him, daring him to say anything. I've got a mission with Ino, Naruto said after a moment, so I can't help you finish the attic. His face was filled with concern and worry. I can't help you look for a solution, his eyes seemed to say. And what happens if something else happens from all that weird stuff? Don't worry, Sakura said quickly. I'll finish it. I'll be careful, she tried to answer with her own eyes. What about your headache? It's fine for now, Sakura said truthfully. And besides, I heal quickly. You freak. No wonder why your wounds never bother you. Naruto grinned and nodded his head firmly once to show he understood. Yeah, ain't it great? Bah. Ino's voice carried well, despite not being very loud. He's just leaving so he doesn't have to eat your cooking, you worthless troll. Naruto disappeared back into the kitchen. I don't blame him, he replied honestly. Sakura didn't hear Ino's reply, as she had hurried back into her room and leapt out of the window with M-chan clinging to the brim of Papa Haruno's straw hat. Sasuke sat up in bed, blinking tiredly and stared at, without seeing, the foot of his bed. The sunshine that poured through his open window tried to beckon him forth into wakefulness. Come, Sasuke-chan, the sunshine seemed to sing, chorused by the birds that twittered outside his open window. Awaken. Come dance and play in the great waltz of life. Fuck you, Sasuke muttered, rolling over and pulling the pillow over his head. Wakey wakey. It's a new day. You have your whole life waiting ahead of you. He stubbornly curled into a ball. Forget life. I need my sleep. But just think of all that you can get done today. The sun's powers continued to grow, reaching the edge of his bed and creeping upward like a certain pervert sneaking through a woman's bathhouse. Sasuke finally sat upright. He hated mornings. If he were God, he would do away with mornings so only afternoons and evenings existed. Either that, or buy some window blinds. Sasuke ground the heel of his palm into his eyes to wipe the sleep away, stood up, stretched, yawned, and continued with his daily ritual of forcing his body to wake up. First, there was the 8 cups of tea, to which extra caffeine had been added. And sugar, lots of sugar. One of these days, he would face the fact that he was hopelessly addicted to it. But now was not the time. Next, there was the hour-long, painfully cold shower. With that all done, the temperature in his little apartment had already begun to rise sharply. By noon, it would be unbearably warm. The stark contrast between this and his shower was the final shock that woke him completely. Yawning, he walked over to his window. He slid the glass up and lifted a single leg over the windowsill. He paused, sitting sideways on the sill as he looked over Konoha from his viewpoint. He felt nothing as he looked at the buildings, except the sense of not being alone. He had felt as if he was being watched and had been since that fight with Naruto. He gritted his teeth. He had to continue helping with the school children for now until Kakashi came back from the mission. But as soon as the academy was out, he could sneak out of the fort to do some training. Naruto wasn't going to one-up him. Sasuke pushed the bitterness away as he swung the other leg over the sill. He slid down the roof's outcropping until he reached the edge, and then glanced around on the street below. It wouldn't do to land on someone who was hurrying along. Like that eyesore that was barraging down the street, approaching at a rapid speed. Good God, what a fashion disaster. Sasuke eyed the oversized shirt, its print blinding with its brightly colored fluorescent pink flamingos and green tropical plants. The shorts were only slightly better, with their plaid print of yellow, white, and peach. And that straw hat. What was the point of having a stuffed monkey pinned to its brim? He waited until the person passed beneath his perch before he jumped off. As he landed on the street with a clatter of his shoes against the pavement, the person's head swiveled about. With a very familiar yelp of dismay, the person twisted about and his speed increased drastically. Sasuke blinked in surprise. Naruto. The sound nin scrambled desperately through the woods, his speed blinding and headlong in his desperate rush. His fellow shinobis had been torn limb from limb, shredded to bits without remorse. To make matters worse, there weren't enough left to tell how thorough any inflicted damage before death had been, so they must have been partially eaten. How anything could have been that strong to do that to 2 of Orochimaru's strongest fighters was a concept that hurt to consider. To complicate matters was that boy, the vessel of the 9-tailed fox. In the Sound Nin's mind, the only creature that was strong and bloodthirsty enough had to have been the 9-tailed fox. The timing was there, the insanity fit into the picture, and a person would wear only their boxers if they shed blood-covered clothes. What bothered the Sound Nin was he hadn't noticed any blood under Naruto's fingernails or face. If the boy was so far gone in his madness, how could he take the time to clean the evidence off? If he did, he should have gotten clean clothes on rather than run amok in his underwear. But the 2 instances had to be connected. He felt it in his bones and his brother agreed with him. There were no coincidences in life, the strings brought everything together as subtle connections that influenced future events. Already pushing fast enough to blur and barely touching the branches he launched himself from, the sound Nin's reckless pace increased ever so slightly. Sakura dashed into Naruto's little apartment with break-necking speeds. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned heavily against it, gasping desperately for breath as she placed a hand over her heaving chest. She had been spotted by a dozen people no less, and the first had been Sasuke-kun. She touched a hand to her face, felt how warm her skin was and knew her face wasn't red due completely to exertion. M-chan jumped from the brim of her hat and scurried across the wooden floor in search of the sort of things that stuffed monkeys tended to search for. Sakura yanked the hat from her head and peeled the ridiculous shirt off. She kicked the shorts free, and the sandals flew from her feet with two more vicious kicks. Clad once more in only her boxers, she hurried to Naruto's room and began rummaging through his things. Orange jumper. Orange jumper. Orange jumper. Oh look! How shocking, another orange jumper. Sakura put her hands on her hips and surveyed the clothes. All were slightly baggy and just a little too big to fit properly. She looked upwards, as if to ask some greater being why. Konoha Orphan Fund, she thought to herself in explanation. It allowed Naruto just enough of a stipend to get by on cheap food bought in bulk, and the clothes looked like they came from a factory closeout. It would explain why they were slightly too big and why he had so many. At least it was better to be oversized than undersized. Naruto's clothes would fit until he hit a growth spurt. Still, anything was better than her father's clothes. Sakura made a face just thinking of how much courage it took to wear them through the streets, even as another person. She reluctantly dressed in an orange jumper that smelled relatively clean. Mental note to self, Sakura thought, must do a load of laundry. There was no way she was going to live 2 more days in Naruto's little flat without doing something. Years of living in a house where dirtiness was fought with a vigor that would have put the Anbu on their missions to shame had left a deep influence on Sakura, and then hurriedly gathered the dirty clothes into a misshapen pile in the far corner of the room. A small, frog-like purse tumbled out of a stray armload. She absently picked it up and stuck it in her pocket as she kicked a few stray socks into the pile. With that fulfilled, Sakura, hitching up the bottom half of her jumper with a purposeful frown, marched off to the attic for more searching. When M-chan realized she was being left behind, she scurried after Papa. Asuma landed before the front door. He paused long enough to put out and tuck his cigarette out of sight. Prior experience with Mother Haruna indicated that she would take the cigarette from him while wearing latex gloves, flush the cigarette down the toilet, and then fumigate both house and visitor with Lysol. It was a traumatizing experience that he was still trying to forget. He knocked once on the door, and then allowed himself into the house when no one answered. As he closed the door behind himself and stooped to remove his sandals, Ino poked her head around a corner. Asuma-sensei, she said brightly, Sakura and I nearly have breakfast ready if you care to have some. That sounded promisingly edible. Ah, what are we having? He asked as he kicked off his sandals beside the door and then trod through the hallway. It never failed to amaze him how he could clearly see his own reflection in the hardwood floor. Since both Harunas worked as house cleaners, it always amazed him how much energy they had left over to clean their own house so thoroughly. Then he made it into the kitchen. The change from sparkly clean to a disaster zone of dirty pots and pans, flour everywhere, scattered dishes, and slopped dough was a shock to Asuma. He felt an odd sense of displacement, as if the universe was spinning out of place or reality was disoriented. He had to lean against the wall for support as his mind stuttered to a shocked halt. This did not fit into his scheme of reality. Denial. His brain screamed. Pretend you are elsewhere. Here. Their faces were stretched with the proudest smiles he had ever seen, Ino and Sakura, both white from head to toe, although, for Sakura, that might have more to do with her uncharacteristic outfit than anything else, as if they had attacked one another with bags of flour. They promptly handed him a plate piled high with waffles and watched him warily. Asuma was beginning to feel as if he'd been had. He prodded the waffles with his chopstick. No, not rubbery or undercooked. They looked a lovely golden brown with a crisp outside. He sniffed. Nothing out of the ordinary. Ah, he said, because he couldn't think of how to tactfully say he decided to trust their cooking. He carefully made his way around the various strewn pots and pans, the larger piles of flour, and the sticky spots where dough had been spilt, to the kitchen table that was only lightly covered with flour and cooking utensils. He scrutinized it carefully. Look at that. Some part of the table was actually fairly clean. He swept the seat of one chair clean with his hand before seating himself. Where's the syrup? Ino asked Sakura. Sakura shrugged. Dunno, she said. You live here. How can you not know? Sakura looked surprised for a moment, frowned thoughtfully a moment more, and then said, You think my parents trust me to be in their kitchen long enough to find out where syrup is kept? Ino put her hands on her hips. Do you really want me to answer that? She asked darkly. She flicked a finger against Sakura's forehead and smudged the flour there. I don't need syrup, Asuma said assuredly. The girls stopped arguing and looked at him in surprise. He swiftly cut the waffles into bite-sized pieces and confidently took a bite. He chewed. His eyes watered up. Check that, he thought desperately as he felt steam starting to leak from his ears. Syrup, I need lots of syrup. Trying desperately not to make a face, and not really succeeding, Asuma barely managed to gulp down the mouthful. He smiled apologetically to the girls, and stood up. I just remembered another engagement, he said hurriedly. Ah, yes, your mission. I'll give you the details, and then I must be off. The girls glanced with some uncertainty to the waffles, but before they could ask any questions, Asuma hurried on. Due to the increased tension and worry for attacks, the Postal Service has decided to hire the help of some experienced ninjas. Unfortunately, you two are just about all we have, he thought. As a C-class mission, your one responsibility is to accompany the Postal Service worker on his delivery to Kikorin. You are not expected to fight. It is hoped that by having extra manpower and the assurance of experienced fighters that the Postal Service worker feel more confident in himself. Should a fight occur, it is your prerogative to see that the mail is delivered. Fight only if you absolutely must. Escape must be your first option. We ordinarily would not give a C-rank mission to you two, but Kakashi believes that you, he looked at Sakura, can handle this calmly, rationally, and to the best of your abilities, and I know can trust you, Ino, he said as he looked at her. I do not know yet who the worker is, but you'll meet him at the post office. Asuma looked at the girls with some worry. It hadn't been his idea to stick the two together with a mission, considering how bitter they acted toward each other. The Hokage had insisted though, saying she couldn't afford rivalries in the village, and the two were going to work together or die trying. Asuma hoped it wouldn't come to that extreme. Do you feel up to this mission? Sakura shrugged. It seemed off to Asuma that Sakura should look so disappointed. Surely working with Ino wasn't that bad, and he would have expected anyone to be happy to get out of Konoha, even if they were in such troublesome times. You shall report to the postal office before 8, Asuma said. I expect you can do this without my help. With that said, he hurried out of the kitchen and out of the Haruna household. He knew of a decent teriyaki stand that was open this early in the day. Sakura's stomach decided to protest its emptiness by growling loudly and adding a twist of pain just as she passed the teriyaki stand. She froze in mid-step and winced, hugging her stomach and trying to remember the last time she had had anything to eat. At least it wasn't ramen, she figured as she looked over the stand. With a sigh, she rummaged through her pockets, found Naruto's purse, and weighed its contents expertly in her hand. There was more than enough there to cover a small bowl of chicken teriyaki. Naruto must have received his stipend not too long ago, or perhaps he had saved from the last few missions. Sakura walked over to the stand and seated herself. She glanced critically over the menu and added a small glass of ice water to her original order when asked if she wanted anything to drink. Sakura found herself comfortably falling into her old habits. Without realizing it, she had crossed her ankles ladylike despite being too short for her feet to touch the ground from where she was seated, folded her napkin demurely on her lap, and laid her chopsticks delicately across her mat. She sighed and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of bustling, the waking people beginning to pass her on the street, the cooking food, Asuma-sensei sitting down beside her and wishing her a good morning. Oh. Hi. Sakura said nervously as the Junin folded his arms on the countertop and squinted at the menu posted above the grill. Fancy meeting you here. Asuma nodded his head in absent-minded agreement. I know. Came here looking for something edible, since the waffles Sakura and Ino offered left much to be desired. You'd think that with two girls who successfully completed their special course in undercover, traditional female menial labor could actually cook. Inner Sakura popped up out of nowhere, the nine-tailed fox as absent as she had been before Asuma's comment. Screw you, you misogynist pig. She yelled in Sakura's mind, thankfully unheard by the rest of the world. And I can too cook. They heard the Kyuubi snorted derisively at that, but wisely remained silent afterwards. Clearly, discretion was the better part of valor, here. Sakura watched Asuma from the corner of her eye. There was a relaxed air about him that, despite being laid back, still held a shadow of seriousness. The man worked with three very difficult children who had nothing in common with one another, and somehow managed to forge them into a cohesive team. He had to have some marginal intelligence and quite a bit of talent, and Sakura was suddenly filled with the need to pull him aside and confide all her problems in him. She didn't look forward to searching the attic, and she had an itch on her leg where M-chan clung. She wanted to break the plans she had made with Naruto, and why not? It wasn't as if she specifically said, I promise. Still, Naruto trusted her to stick it out for these 2 remaining days, and Asuma looked relaxed, puffing languidly on his lit cigarette. He looked as if he had temporarily removed himself from stress and worries and was enjoying it immensely. She couldn't bother him with her problems. Sakura's hands twisted her white napkin. She couldn't disturb this fragile peace he basked in. Asuma glanced sideways and noticed Sakura's tension. Is something the matter? He asked. She jumped, startled. And no. She laughed, the tips of her fingers pressed lightly against her lips. No. Nothing is wrong. Why would you say that? You aren't acting like yourself. Sakura froze in horror. The server set the small bowl of food before her, and she swiftly turned to it, grabbing the chopsticks and splitting them sloppily. Hey. Oh boy, she cried in false happiness. Teriyaki. It's not ramen but it'll do. She noisily gulped down a mouthful and glanced sideways to see if she had somehow managed to put Asuma's fears to rest. He was leaning on one elbow and holding his cigarette lightly between 2 fingers. You're trying too hard, he said knowingly, giving her an expression of, I know you're up to something, and the food suddenly became tasteless in her mouth. No longer hungry, Sakura pushed her bowl to the side and stared at the tabletop, fighting down the urge to throw her arms around Asuma, bury her head against his shoulders, and sob her heart out. This was stupid. She couldn't hold up this charade. Naruto couldn't hold up the charade. Why did she agree to those 2 days again? She turned to Asuma, who placed his order, and opened her mouth to explain the entire story, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the flashing memory of Naruto resolutely holding up 3 fingers, perhaps it was the sinister snicker that tickled her mind. Whatever it was, she stopped, and then smiled wanly at Asuma. I'll be all right, she said. It's just one of those times. Really? A brainstorm struck. Yeah, you know how it is. I mean, we're guys, so I can say this openly, right? Sakura looked around. No one passing seemed to be interested in them, and the cook was whistling merrily as he concentrated on his tasks. You know, this whole thing about puberty is really, She blushed, despite of herself. Inner Sakura poked her awareness. Are you trying to say what I think you're trying to say? She asked Sakura in disbelief. She suddenly flashed the victory sign. Score. Shut up. Sakura pushed her inner self out of the big picture and tried to ignore the resentful grumbling that took place in the background of her thoughts in the dark, amused chuckling from a different source. Asuma cleared his throat. Yes, trying times, he said knowingly with a nod of his head and a flashing look of relief. Just from personal experience alone, I know how difficult it can be. Sakura hunched her shoulders forward and hoped he wouldn't go into any embarrassing anecdotes. But it's not going to be easier for you, and probably less so when you haven't any parents. He gave Sakura a concerned look, and then reached his hand out and settled it on her shoulder, in a comradely guy-to-guy manner. If you ever need to know about anything or just need someone to talk to, especially another guy, I'm here for you. Sakura gave him a smile of relief. Thank you, she said honestly, although if she told him anything it certainly wouldn't involve puberty. The cook put a bowl before Asuma, who turned from Sakura and grabbed his chopsticks. Although, he said hurriedly, the words rushing headlong as if he had seen an escape up ahead and it was close to outrunning him, although such matters may be better discussed with Jiraiya-sensei. He's more experienced in such matters as, that. Sakura hoped it wouldn't come to that. While she had never personally met Jiraiya, the things she had heard from Naruto peeking in the women's bath, honestly, was enough for her to suspect Jiraiya hadn't completed his own transition through puberty. She looked down at her bowl of chicken teriyaki and mechanically finished eating. She and Asuma ate in silence, but she finished before he did. I have to finish yesterday's mission, she said, bouncing off her stool. She tried to ignore the persisting itch where M-chan clung. Asuma looked up from his meal. Are you not finished with it? He asked. Still have to put some equipment away, like brooms, Sakura said. We stopped when it got too dark, and I also wanted to make sure that it looked as clean in the light as it did last night after the sun set. She held her breath. The last thing she needed was Asuma coming along to check her work, although she didn't know why he would. When he went back to eating his teriyaki, Sakura made her escape, bouncing to the roofs of the surrounding buildings and moving toward the east where the attic was. She practically flew over the rooftops. It was surprising how little effort she needed to actually move, how much stronger Naruto's body was than her own. It made her feel strangely inadequate. Here she was, one of the two smartest ninjas to graduate this year from the academy. She wasn't sure where to place Shikamaru since, all things considering, he certainly lacked what motivation she had, and she was hard put to keep pace with someone who flunked 3 times before he actually graduated. What had she been doing, all those years, by mooning after? Well, she wouldn't follow that line of thought when she couldn't even cook. Well, she could, sort of, if it came in a package and the only requirements were adding water and/or heating. With a sigh, Sakura hurried onward. First impressions are often the most influential, and so far, Ino's first impression of the postal service worker wasn't a very good one. In her opinion, he was a balding, rotund little man with too much stomach and mustache, but not enough spine. In the time she and Sakura had been with him, he had dismissed Ino as a dumb blonde, demanded to know how someone as flaky as Sakura was going to protect him, thought this entire delivery wasn't worth his pension, and why again was everyone so sure that 2 little brats could possibly be enough to protect him? Protect him from who? Ino thought scornfully. Us. Since they were trying to protect the man, Ino and Sakura both refrained from giving him a solid kick or 3. Instead, the two gritted their teeth in what a half-blind 80-year-old, toothless woman would have politely called a smile. Sakura had been in a poor mood, although Ino could hardly see how that was different from other times, but she was acting odd. That is to say, while Ino had always known Sakura was a little off whenever she said, this was off the wall. Of course, given Sakura's track record since the Chunin exam and that really odd entity that had literally tossed out Ino supposed she shouldn't be surprised. Can't we just leave him tied to a tree and deliver the mail ourselves? Sakura asked behind her hand as she shot the postal worker a shifty look when his attention diverted elsewhere. There was something completely uncharacteristic about the way she walked with her feet turned inward, the way she held her head and angled her shoulders. It was almost as if she and Naruto had switched places, but Henge was out of the question. Just to be sure, Ino had, accidentally, whacked Sakura several times during their waffles making episode, but never once did Sakura's appearance change. Ino knew Sakura didn't have the stamina to hold Henge through multiple physical attacks. They'd also been together since early morning and Ino didn't know of anyone not Junin level who could maintain Henge for great periods of time. They walked together down the road, the postal worker lurking between them and sending fugitive glances at his surroundings. Ino and Sakura were quiet for a time, neither willing to break the heavy silence that loomed over them like an ominous thunderhead. Still, Ino was the first to break the silence. "Why are you dressed all in white?" "'Cause it beat pink," Sakura replied somewhat absent-mindedly. Ooh, Ino thought this was a curious point, since Sakura decided that pink was a good, feminine color that would attract Sasuke's attention. "It's the only non-pink that I had," Sakura said, finally becoming more aware of Ino. She gave Ino a strange look, almost as if to ask why it was a shock that she should be wearing something that lacked a black bull's eye. "Don't you have anything else? Besides underwear?" Ino hissed and jerked her head toward the postal worker. His name was unknown to the two of Genins, since both were determined to forget about him as soon as their mission was completed. Sakura looked away, and Ino clapped her hands cheerfully. "We should go shopping," she declared happily. "It'll cheer you up and provide you with clothes that aren't pink." Sakura looked suspicious. Well, that was nothing new. "Why?" she asked carefully, edging slightly away as Ino grinned manically. Ino wagged a finger. "I've been thinking," she said. "Uho," declared the postal worker, blonde thinking alert. To which Ino considered several miserable and painful ways to kill him, but discarded all simply because they couldn't possibly convey her irritation with the silly little man, of how we lost touch, of how nice it would be to do something together. One of Sakura's eyebrows arched upward in disbelief. "Why should this be so difficult for you to understand?" Ino demanded impatiently. The postal worker snorted. "Look, I'm not paying to have you two to girl bond on duty." Rather than acting affronted, Ino chose to laugh at Sakura's puzzled expression. "That's it," she crowed triumphantly. "Girl bonding. We haven't done it since, oh, we were yay high." She waved her hand somewhere in the vicinity of her knees, "and we had finished our flower arrangement classes." Sakura's eyes were wide. Poor dear must have been shocked at Ino's open display of friendship. She ought to do this more often if Sakura proved to be this surprised at the idea of girl bonding. This, of course, was ignoring the fact that Sakura's expression was more of a deer caught in the ninja's game of tag look than it was surprise. They were attacked around noon by rabid squirrels. "Happens all the time around here," said the postal worker conversationally as he stood off to the side of the road where not a single living creature would approach him while he smoked a gigantic, evil-smelling cigar. "Feed one little bugger and refuse to do it again so the whole lot attacks you," he added. "But don't worry, at least the wild geese aren't located on this run." He dodged one flung squirrel as Naruto screamed in fury and threw them left and right as soon as they fell on him. Ino was situated behind the postal worker. She had said somebody needed to watch his back, but Naruto secretly suspected Ino was hiding in the ill-smelling safety of the cigar smoke. Huffing, puffing, red in the face, Naruto tried to perform his Kujbunshin without Ino noticing, but he still couldn't summon Sakura's chakra. He finally resorted to stepping on those misfortunate enough to get under his feet. They made satisfying crunches. Nothing. Sakura carefully checked over her shoulder and tossed the book over it. It landed where it wouldn't upset something. The last time she had carelessly tossed a book had led to being attacked by shadows that she had only managed to get rid of by running into the sunlight that filtered through the window. Other incidences that occurred. The never-ending laughter in one hand mirror when she picked it up, she didn't see what was so funny about her reflection, the chair with the gaping maw that chased her, reminiscent of the trunk, and another stuffed monkey, this one without a tail and its fur, a charcoal gray, had attached itself to her and calling her grandfather, were almost enough to make her give up. What about that book Naruto mentioned? She wondered. Perhaps she should be reading that instead of trying to sort through this mess. With a reluctant sigh, Sakura carefully began to pack everything away. She ducked another shadow that tried to grab her about the shoulders, ruthlessly beat off the flying carpet from her in Naruto's last attic expedition as it tried to fling itself at her, and methodically began to put everything in its place and cover all with the sheets. It was quicker to pack everything now that she recognized the various levels of danger, and she did so briskly, moving with the grace and efficiency she had acquired from years of following her parents' orders. She moved from one end of the attic to the other, sweeping up dust and scooping it into the thick burlap bag grandmother Puu had silently handed to her the moment she stepped into the house. Grandmother Puu hadn't asked any questions, such as where was Sakura, and why hadn't they finished earlier. Sakura didn't volunteer anything since she hadn't been asked. As she cleaned and packed, Sakura carefully kept her mind blank of the personal inadequacy that had been nagging her since she ran along the roofs after speaking with Asuma. Without realizing it, Sakura bumped backwards into the shelf from which the statue that caused the mess had fallen. She whipped around and steadied it with one strong hand. The various knick-knack rocked and swayed, but none fell. She brushed a hand over the edge, wiping away the dust and studying the other artifacts. She wondered if there was a statue that could reverse the effect. She stopped, her hand freezing in mid-brush, and then slowly turned to stare at the empty, undisturbed dust on the shelf. Her body was rigid as she shook her head slowly, trying to deny what she wasn't seeing. The remains of the shattered statue were gone. Sakura tried to process it. She tried to ignore the malicious laughter beginning to rise in the deeper recesses of her mind. She tried not to think of how it was Naruto and always Sasuke, being the strong ones physically and mentally, because she couldn't handle the situation even in Naruto's body. She leaned away from the shelf, stumbled backwards until she tripped over the puzzled purple monkey and landed hard on her backside. 2 days, she said slowly, her voice edging on hysteria. The laughter grew. Sakura dropped the broom she clung to as if it had burned her, and leapt out of the attic through the window in an attempt to outrun the laughter and inadequacy. Should we? Ino asked Naruto as the postal worker scratched fiercely at his skin, glowering coldly at the two genin. Naruto shrugged. He's the one who ran into the poison ivy to hide, not us. Ino nodded her head and pumped a fist in the air. Exactly. So apologizing would be out of the question. You brats. I ought to strip right here and now and jump into the river. Ino and Naruto shuddered. That, Ino told Naruto behind one hand, is a sight we can do without. The postal worker huffed, dropped his knapsack of mail from his shoulders, and began to open his buttons one by one. Both Naruto and Ino cringed as the flabby, hairy chest was slowly revealed. Naruto glowered. I say we toss him into the river before he has a chance to finish. Ino nodded sharply. Right. They rolled up their sleeves and pounced on the postal worker before he had finished unbuttoning his uniform. The bag of mail was kicked in one direction, dry land, and the postal worker was booted in another direction, not so dry land. Yeek. Splash. Sakura-chan, Ino said in a friendly manner as she put an arm around Naruto's shoulders and watched the postal worker flounder in the water. I think we can consider this a deed done good. Don't you mean a good deed done? Naruto asked as he smoothly shrugged Ino's arm free. Ino grinned and grabbed Naruto's upper arm, steering him over to the shade where they proceeded to sit and wait for the postal worker to splash his way to shore. That depends entirely upon whose point of view you look at. Sakura numbly made her way through the streets, her arms wrapped around her shoulders. She whimpered quietly, trying to ignore the snarling threats, with all of the gory imagery and accompanying feelings of nausea, of the nine-tailed fox and inner Sakura screaming at it to be quiet. She tried to ignore the itching at the very tips of her fingers, and the slight stretching of skin across her cheeks. She tried to ignore the fact that this was only going to be 2 days. No, she couldn't handle it. She was too weak. She didn't have the strength of character to last. The statue was gone. The statue couldn't be gone. But it was. She had voices in her head. This wasn't new, to be sure, but these voices had personalities far too large to fit in her head, let alone get along peacefully. She and Naruto were in deep, well, it was deep. The statue couldn't be gone. It just couldn't. Oh, but it was. Sakura wrestled with her doubts and fears, and didn't see Rock Lee when she passed him. Oh, Naruto-kun. Sakura hurried on. Rock Lee blinked, puzzled at being ignored. How rude, he said finally, dejected from such scorn. No one likes the cripple, he thought unhappily. With a sigh, he limped in the opposite direction with his crutches, and Sakura continued on, half walking and half running. She ignored most of her surroundings and vaguely took notice of people, but just enough not to walk into them. She barely missed stepping on one little kid as the squirt dashed out onto the street, almost tripping into Sakura. Sorry. The kid called over his shoulder as he dashed through. Another passed Sakura. She stopped and looked wide-eyed in the direction they had come running, just in time to see a mob of children bearing down upon her. Eek! Sakura jumped aside and scrambled up a light post as the mob surged past, the children tripping and falling over each other to get away. What's with them? She asked herself, craning her neck and watching them disappear into the distance. She looked around to see what was chasing them, if any. Sasuke trailed behind, his hands curled into tight fists at his sides, and his expression dark, angry, and contemplative of something violent yet satisfying. He was muttering something under his breath about sprogs, spawns of ogres, and parents should not breed without having a certain IQ level. For just one moment, looking at his strength, at his gliding walk, he seemed to be a predator on the prowl. For just one moment, as the voices were drowned in the rising roar of silence in her mind, Sakura was able to disassociate from her current situation. For just one moment, she basked in his strength and abilities, the memories of being protected by him. For just one moment, she gave into her true nature. With a happy little squeak, Sakura slid down the post and pounced on Sasuke, her arms sliding around his neck. Sasuke-kun. Sasuke's hair stood on end as Naruto's arms circled his throat. With an indignant yelp, Sasuke broke free of Sakura's hold and scrambled backwards, his eyes filled with shock and his fingers twisting in a sign to ward off evil. Sakura realized belatedly of what she wasn't supposed to be doing. Oops. Sasuke. She yelled suddenly, pointing a finger at him while placing her other hand on her hip. I'll get you one of these days, you bastard. Oh shoot. That didn't go over too well. Sasuke was giving her a look of mixed fear and revulsion, and Sakura decided to beat a hasty retreat while she still had some shreds of dignity left somewhere. She was sure she had some, maybe. Without saying another word, she whipped about on her heel and bolted. Amused laughter, not tinted by viciousness or hatred, rang through her mind. It didn't sound as if it belonged to either the nine-tailed fox or inner Sakura, yet it made her feel slightly better about her situation. Ooh, this is so cute. You have to try this on. And another bathing suit was tossed on top of Naruto's armload of clothes that Ino was piling on him. At this point, he had given up on being able to see over the material that was tickling his nose. His legs trembled from exertion and he breathed heavily, as if he had run a marathon. Who'd have thought that 6 hours of shopping fruitlessly for something that he didn't even like, and certainly couldn't afford, could be so tiring? In his old body it wouldn't have been a problem, but Sakura's body didn't have the stamina and strength that he needed. His arms were beginning to become fatigued, and all he wanted to do was sit down and not move. And his breasts, Sakura's, hurt. He hadn't been so much aware of it until he felt the constant pressure of the clothes pressed continuously against his chest. 2 days of this. There was no way he was going to survive. Naruto eyed the frilly, barely there bikini that Ino had added, and knew exactly what was going to happen if he tried it on, and Sakura learned, he had less of a chance surviving that than these remaining 2 days. This is so your color. Ino held up a silk blouse of evergreen and threw that on top of the pile. It was the camel that broke Naruto's straw back. He collapsed as his strength and stamina were pushed beyond his limits, the clothes falling on top and smothering him under their heavy weight. Honestly, it's not that bad. He ignored Ino's sulking complaints as she dug him free of the pile. Dazed, he barely knew that she was leaning him against one stack of stuffed bras. Are you okay, Sakura? Ino asked finally with genuine concern. She pressed a hand against Naruto's forehead. You don't have a temperature. Naruto shook his head to clear his thoughts. Weak, he muttered. He held his hands up and looked at them in amazement. Sakura's fingers were long, her hands small and her wrists thin. It was such a delicate body. It lacked strength, stamina, and the pools of chakra he used so freely in his techniques. He suddenly grabbed Ino's hands and compared them with Sakura's. Ino's hands were larger and had calluses where Sakura's had none. Did Sakura realize how much difference it made in fighting to have that little extra bit of strength, that little bit of extra speed? Chakra enhanced it, but if there was nothing to enhance, what was the point of perfect control? Sakura's body needed help. Sakura needed help, but considering where he was and she was, he was best able to help Sakura by helping her body. I gotta go, he said, somehow finding the strength to jump to his feet. Why? We don't have to report back for another 2 hours. No, I gotta train. He hurried around the pile of dropped clothes and ducked under one saleswoman as she descended upon Naruto and Ino. Natural troublemaker and rabble-rouser that he was before he became a genin, Naruto easily broke free of the saleswoman's grasp on his shoulder. Ino, model student and daughter, didn't have the experience. Naruto didn't feel guilty in the least for leaving Ino responsible for the dropped clothes. He had a mission. Find Sakura, inform her how he was going to train her body, and then maybe get Pervert Sensei's input on the quickest way to train a girl's body. It couldn't be any different from his, but then again, he still didn't know how to use Sakura's chakra. Trouble. The Sound Nin ducked his head in a respectful bow for Kabuto, breathing heavily and his hands pressed firmly against his knees to hide the exhaustion that shook his limbs. What sort of trouble? The Sound Nin trembled. 2 companions dead, killed by some unrecognizable beast. I should add, however, that the 9-tailed fox appears to be unstable, since its vessel last night beat his head against the pavement and yelled about it shutting up. At the mention of the 9-tailed fox, something seemed to flash through Kabuto's eyes, but the moment was so fleeting and the look was so obscure that the Sound Nin might have imagined it. Ah, he said, before falling silently into thought. He bowed his head until his chin nearly touched his chest, and he wrinkled his brow. After a moment, he lifted his head and adjusted his glasses. Tell me more, I'll relay it to Orochimaru-sama and see what he decides. The Sound Nin smiled gratefully, since Orochimaru had a bad habit of punishing the messenger. Sakura, Sakura, Sakura-chan. Where are you? He squinted into the distance and looked up and down the streets. Still no sign, even after 2 hours of searching. There had been no sign of her in the attic, but since there was a distinct lack of any signs of struggle in the attic when he checked it, and a distinct lack of blood, which made Naruto infinitely relieved, since he supposed that if Sakura got hurt by anything in the attic he would find blood or blonde hair. However, that other little monkey that perched on top of his head and started calling him grandmother was a tad too much. He wasn't going to panic yet. When he came across Sasuke, the brooding Uchiha air was hovering over a bramble bush in which 2 academy students had become hopelessly tangled. He was loudly contemplating various ways to free them, although all the ways he had suggested thus far consisted of catching the bush on fire. Such planning spoken out loud only served to make the students squirm uncomfortably, furthering their entanglement and misery. Nay, Sasuke, have you seen Naruto? Naruto asked. At the mention of Naruto's name, Sasuke's hair stood on end and he stiffened as if someone wrapped ice-cold hands around his neck. He slowly looked over his shoulder at who he thought to be Sakura. Don't mention that name to me, he muttered in an angry voice, his eyes narrowed into slits. Naruto felt a brief flash of annoyance. What did I do this time? I need to find him. He refused to drop the subject as Sasuke's body language demanded. Sasuke harumphed. I have no idea where dead last can be. Sasuke muttered something. Naruto frowned and leaned forward, concentrating to catch the words. The lech. Who's a lech? Sasuke jumped and looked over his shoulder at Naruto again. There was something odd about the look, something almost panicked in his expression and twitching in the corner of his eye. Sakura, he said, clearly struggling to be polite, stay away from Naruto. He's been acting very, very strange. Not that he naturally doesn't, just more strange than usual. Naruto considered punching Sasuke, but decided against it. So you don't know where he is? Sasuke turned back to considering his charges, and Naruto did a quick mental review of the various HNs he knew of. That one must be the I don't know and I don't give a damn, either HN. Naruto stared at Sasuke's back for a moment, resenting how he was stuck in a weak, female body that he had to close his eyes to just so he could go to the bathroom, never mind the fact that he knew what the female body looked like and didn't care, while Mr. I'm too cool to care contemplated setting brats on fire. What a creep. Sasuke was always up to something, always trying to prove how much better he was than others, and all the girls only cared how good looking he was and how well he fought. The jerk probably sat in the dark of his house and considered joining forces with insane psychopaths. Life was so unfair. Naruto spent his days training to become the Hokage, and he would, damn it. Even if he was stuck in Sakura's body for all of eternity, because if Tsunade could be the first female Hokage, then he could be the first male-turned-female Hokage. A little, silly thing like not being in his actual body was never going to stop him, and the only time Sakura ever noticed Naruto was when she actually became Naruto. With a grunt, Naruto turned his back on Sasuke and continued his search for Sakura. Behind him, Sasuke's mind was only half attuned to the academy ninjas. Sakura didn't call me Sasuke-kun. It was a small detail and one that shouldn't have bothered him, but it did. Sakura is never so casual. Added to how Naruto acted just as he did earlier, in a small corner of his mind, a miniature Sasuke rocked on his heels with his head in his hands, chanting in a weak voice, I've been violated. I've been violated. And Sakura not acting like Sakura, made Sasuke arrive to a calculation he wasn't liking. To Naruto's credit, the boy was always a little off, but pink flamingos and violation went above and beyond paranormal. But the next time Naruto decided to infringe upon his personal space, which was a large, invisible bubble with a 30-foot diameter, Sasuke was going to Chidori the runt from one end of Konoha to the other. Naruto spotted Jiraiya at the women's bathing house. The white-haired shinobi squatted low on his heels, his face pressed against the wooden wall and his fingers flexing in a suggestive way. On the ground beside him was a notebook and a drill with a few wood shavings clinging to its bit. Naruto smacked his alternate sensei across the back of his head. Why am I not surprised? He demanded hotly. Jiraiya blinked in surprise at being attacked by a petite, pink-haired genin who looked vaguely familiar. Do I know you? He asked, rubbing his head where the backhanded blow had struck him. What he loosely recalled of Sakura did not fit in with his view of her current physical movements or vocal tones. I have a favor to ask. I need some training. Jiraiya waved Naruto's comment away. Sorry, he said dismissively with a crooked smile. You're just a little too young to receive training from me. What? He glared defensively. What about Naruto? Oh. Disappointment and understanding were achieved simultaneously and both made clear in Jiraiya's face and voice. You want that training. Naruto didn't want to know what the implied training from earlier was really supposed to mean then, so he avoided pursuing that line of thought. I trained Naruto because of various reasons I have absolutely no intention of informing you. But, come back when you're gained another cup size, kid. Naruto definitely knew what that meant. Having Ino earlier that day try to pawn off several stuffed bras to increase your cup size, you need all the help you can get if you want Sasuke to notice you over what I have. He smacked Jiraiya again just for the sake of principles and stormed off, muttering, just as well, you'd have probably groped me, pervert sensei. After Jiraiya peeled himself from where Sakura's blow had face planted him against the wall, he shook his head and rocked himself on his heels as he considered what just passed. Sakura acting like Naruto. This required investigation. Naruto and Jiraiya's old team of genin had been the only ones who dared to call him anything other than Jiraiya-sensei. Anyways, it wasn't as if she was unattractive or too young, although she was, but that a stuffed bra would greatly enhance her appeal. Ah well, can't have everything when you're stalking the ladies. There was some giggling, splashes. Ooh, I told you we weren't supposed to do that anymore. It was a one-time experience. Oh, don't be silly. What can one more time do any harm? From the bathhouse, there were more splashes and a feminine squeak. Jiraiya found himself leering like the super pervert that he was as he turned back to the peephole. Investigation could wait, though. He had to catch up on his research. Yeah, that was it. They sat in a distant seafood restaurant that bordered the Fire Country, preparing themselves for another expedition into its lands with all its volatile natives. Distant power blasts that had been detected demanded investigation since it most likely involved the Kyuubi brat. Akatsuki decided to send the two ninjas most familiar with that area of the world, so off they went, using just a small touch of henge to hide their most distinct, recognizable features. The reasoning behind sending these two was that, after the trouble they left behind, no one would really expect them to come back. It followed such thoughts as, after what they did, they wouldn't dare show up. That those of Konoha would undoubtedly, or at least hopefully, be thinking. Such reasoning on Akatsuki's part reached the far ends of illogic and came around the other end to logic, in a rather convoluted, twisted manner that only psychopaths and geniuses could attain, but usually only if both went hand in hand. Contrary to most rumors, Itachi liked being paired off with Kisame. Aside from how the swordsman's skin color was probably a symptom of several different diseases, undoubtedly due to his bad habit of eating everything he could get his hands on and/or teeth attached to, and Itachi secretly suspected Kisame's parents weren't wholly human, the man did possess a sense of humor Itachi could appreciate. Kisame also did his job well, followed orders, and didn't argue in the middle of a mission for the sake of one-upping the person placed in charge. After putting up with Anbu in his early teenage years, Itachi could appreciate such tactfulness. Kisame sat down at the wooden table across from Itachi and peered at the order Itachi had placed when he had went to visit the men's room. "What are we having?" he asked as he poked the broth with his spoon. "We're having shark fin soup," Itachi replied. The one issue he had with pairing off with Kisame was that the swordsman ordered all the time. It was high time they had something he liked. Kisame gasped in dismay and peered at the bowl, plucking it up just as a faraway blast rocked the ground and made all the furniture vibrate in an interesting manner. Itachi's soup splashed on the table, but Kisame's bowl was saved. "Mom, is that you?" Looking down at his own soup, Itachi suddenly remembered why Kisame had always been the one to order. The fallen oak had once been large and grand. Now, years and years after it was knocked down, it might have been the victim of some stray shinobi practicing his deadly art. It might have been just another loss in the great battle against the fox demon. It was spongy and covered with thick, springy moss. It would have been one of the most comfortable seats Sakura had ever had the privilege of sitting upon, if she had taken the time to contemplate how many years it had taken for the oak to grow, and how many years passed after it had been yanked out of the ground and tossed aside like a useless match. It must have been decades for time and weather to make this perfect seat for her butt to grace. Sakura didn't care. Strangely enough though, this fallen oak was all that was left in the surrounding that Sakura had accidentally cleared. She had arrived here in the far middle of nowhere, where only animals and trunks that shouldn't eat sound nins but did prayed. The worry had pushed her far beyond the village, and finally she tried henge once more. She tried to summon the chakra, but each time she did the bloodlust and hatred would return in increasing amounts. The chakra came easily enough on her fourth try, but then it had exploded as if bursting past her fragile dams of control, to wipe out everything in the vicinity. In a corner of her mind, inner Sakura said, "You idiot. Are you going to sit here in the open and just wait for others to come investigating? How many of them will be leaf shinobi who know all about the fox demon? Let them come," the subject of inner Sakura's last sentence said, somehow sounding smug and petulant at the same time. I could use some entertainment. Sakura's hand shook and moved on its own accord, to the little knapsack strapped to her thigh. With a yelp, she grasped the moving hand with her other hand. The nine-tailed fox sneered at her attempt and the hand moved further against her will. Oh no, you don't. Inner Sakura's strength slammed into Sakura and the hand froze, twitching as two different wills clashed. The Kyuubi finally conceded. You are always ruining my fun. Now you're starting to sound like a pouting child. Inner Sakura told the nine-tailed fox with a shake of her finger. The nine-tailed fox sniffed. That's to imply a human-like characteristic to something as immortal and as superior as I to mankind. Denial if I ever heard of it. The nine-tailed fox sputtered angrily and muttered wordlessly under what constituted as its breath. It sounded suspiciously like, blasted vixens. Unnerving as it was, both Sakuras managed to ignore the grumbling. With a dejected sigh, Sakura stood up, quickly dusted herself off, checked for any visible injuries, and then set off running away from her scene of the crime. She moved faster, the ground seemed to fly beneath her feet. How long would it take to train her body until she moved like this? How long would it take to become strong, if she practiced long and hard every day with people to push her onward, like Naruto? She didn't want to be Hokage, but what was the point of being a ninja if she did nothing to be good at it? If she ever when she got back into her body, she was going to start gathering training tips from Naruto, Sasuke, and even Ino. Her legs pumping faster, the countryside a blur as she hurried onward, Sakura made the silent vow to improve herself or die trying. If the voices in her head were any indication of what her future would be like, it may just come to that. So she ran, instead, as if she could somehow leave them behind, to escape them and all that they entailed. They were almost gone. Almost. A soft voice, almost too soft to distinguish in the roaring despair that filled Sakura's mind, amongst the grumbling of a demon whose power was beyond comprehension, and a split personality brought to life by a single desire for a sister, whispered. The fork in the mountains. Without really knowing why, perhaps because the masculine voice was smooth and kind, in a world that was harsh and demanding, Sakura steered east to where the mountains dipped into a sharp V. She slammed into the surrounding forest and foliage like a bull on a rampage, breaking through underbrush and branches as if they were mere twigs beneath her feet. The nine-tailed fox sighed and sneered in frustration. Some ninja you are. I've pulverized those far worthier than you'll ever be. Will you shut up, already? Inner Sakura demanded, hands on her hips and her jaw clenched. You're not doing any better than I am and a great deal worse, too, since you got sealed into the belly button of the number one loudest, most hyperactive ninja in the village. The nine-tailed fox sniffed. He's infinitely more amusing and skilled than you two will ever be, even if there's barely any room to think in here, what with the size of your ego, alter ego, and cowardice. Sakura froze as the world suddenly came crashing down about her ears. Cowardice. The word echoed through her mind, drowning out Inner Sakura's response and the fox demon sniping. Cowardice. That's right, she thought to herself as her eyes stung. Tears dribbled down her face. She was a coward. She hid behind Naruto and Sasuke. No wonder they moved beyond her reach. She could never walk before them when she took refuge in their strength and their skill, potential blotted out in their shadows. She was nothing compared to them because she was too scared. Too proud. She thought she was stronger than them because she was so much smarter and knew so much more, but in her vanity she fell short, and she was scared of using skills other than her intelligence. Her wit amounted to little when the enemy's strength outmatched her brains. What are you doing now? The nine-tailed fox demanded in angry disbelief. Sakura sniffed and wiped her wet eyes and runny nose with the back of her hand. Why, you're right, she cried between sobs and sniffles. I am a coward. I can't do anything. Sob, I'm weak and I'm, sob, worthless. Like so many other conscious males faced with a crying female, though it could be argued if the nine-tailed fox qualified as male, the demon floundered nervously. And now that's enough. Quit blubbering like a baby. Good grief. Inner Sakura bustled past the nine-tailed fox, whose nervousness was becoming quite clear. She descended upon Sakura like a rainbow reaching from the heavens as a sign that the worst of the storm was over. Sakura, she said gently, if you were such a coward, could you have protected Naruto and Sasuke during the Chunin exam? Why yeah, wait, I wasn't there for that one, was I? Inner Sakura swatted the nine-tailed fox, but it had no more effect on it than a mosquito's bite on a crocodile. It again muttered something about blasted vixens. But if Lee hadn't saved me, I'd have been killed, sniffle sniffle, and so would have Naruto and Sasuke, sob, and if Ino hadn't shown up, sob, we'd have been killed, and the same thing, sob gasp, if Sasuke hadn't woken up. This, Inner Sakura muttered to the nine-tailed fox, is all your fault. Taken aback by the accusation, the fox demon nonetheless recovered its easy arrogance. What? Am I supposed to apologize now? I can't help it if she falls apart under the least amount of stress. Pathetic excuse of a ninja you are, let alone human. Inner Sakura reared up. Least amount of stress. Least amount of stress. How would you feel if you were a girl put into a boy's body, sneered at and hated by everyone, forced to recognize your own limitations and see them as far more exaggerated than what they are, and realize you may never, ever go back to being what you truly are? You're asking meth, nine-tailed fox asked resentfully. I've only been sealed inside the number one loudest, most hyperactive excuse of a ninja in a rancid village of abominable humans for the past 12 years. I only went from a great demon, with power virtually that of a god's, to this. How about what I feel? If this body dies, so do I. I was immortal. I had female demons falling over themselves for my attention. Male demons respected and feared me. But no, I had to get stuck in someone's belly button. At least you've got a body. And it serves you right, Inner Sakura said petulantly. Does not. Does so. Does not. Does so. Does not. Does so. Not. So. Sakura pulled the hem of her jumper's top from where it was tucked into her trousers and wiped her nose and eyes with it. I may be crying like a baby, but at least I'm not arguing like a bunch of toddlers. The nine-tailed fox and Inner Sakura fell silent. If they were corporeal, Sakura had a feeling they would be glaring at one another and shoving each other with their shoulders. Kind of like Naruto and Sasuke, really. She sighed. I know I'm a coward. I know I am weak. But that's going to change this time. I won't stand for it anymore. I will become strong. I will become fast. I will become a ninja among ninjas, and nothing, not incorporeal voices, not fox demons, not snake humans, and not anything else, nothing is going to stop me. With such brave words uttered, given life by her determination to change so that she could no longer be ashamed of herself, Sakura leapt into the tree branches and hopped off to the V in the mountains, moving swiftly and quietly so that no one not an experienced ninja could hear her. Naruto lay on his back, heaving in fresh breaths of air, and stared up at the clear blue sky. He had only done 2 hours of training, and already his body shook from weariness. Every surface of his skin was covered with bruises, scrapes, and smudges, as if he had gotten into more than dozen street brawls with fighters up to par with his own abilities. As exhausted as he was, Naruto still had enough strength and energy to think. It seemed to him that something was wrong. Sakura's body shouldn't be this weak. He had seen her to more things in greater periods of time without getting so utterly exhausted. Hey, I'm probably just wasting chakra as I usually do, Naruto thought ruefully. I can't control it in this body any more than I could in my last. He sighed. He couldn't do it so well on his own without help. Sakura's body couldn't withstand what he demanded so freely of his own. This time, there was no fox demon to demand rent from. Naruto steeled himself to sit upright. If the pervert sensei was refusing to teach him, then he was going to find someone who would. Kurenai sensei, or maybe Hinata. If they could give him some hints of how a girl's body trained, then maybe he might be able to get somewhere. He just had to do it so they didn't suspect that it was a boy who didn't know how to handle a girl's body that was asking. As his hands clutched the few blades of grass within his reach and he took a deep breath to lift himself upright, a loud voice declared, "You." Ino stormed up the walk and slammed open the front door. The lock shattered under her grip and the door banged loudly into the wall as it was flung open. "Where is she?" She roared into the empty house. In its clean peacefulness, discounting the kitchen, of course, it was oblivious to the angry blonde on a rampage. "Where is that stupid forehead girl?" Ino ran up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, and down the hallway until she reached the bedroom door. Sakura. She flung that open too, and then looked around, her face scrunched up in rage. Nothing. No one. She had looked all over Konoha and had seen neither large forehead nor pink hair of Sakura. Here she had gone out of her way to girl bond with Sakura, and the witch had to run off, leaving her with the short stick and having to pick up afterwards. If Sakura had spoken her scorn and had thrown such kindness into Ino's face, Ino might have forgiven her. But no, trickery and subterfuge. She would have none of that from someone she might have once called a friend, and maybe still did when no one was listening. Fuming silently, she turned to walk out of the door, but a ragged, old book cover caught her eye. Ordinarily, Ino would have ignored books, but since it read, "Love Potion #9 inches across the cover. When you're in competition with the owner of the book over the best bachelor under the age of 15 in the village, it's not something you wanted escaping your notice. Ino snatched it up from off the surface of the table the book rested upon, and flipped through the pages until she found the recipe for the love potion number 9. This potion is a dangerous mixed substance meant to induce infatuation of the drinker upon the first of its kind possessing pheromones. Use to your own discretion, dear reader, as embarking upon the journey of this potion's use may cause much hardship. It is recommended that this potion be used as a last resort when your love has ignored you to the point of you taking your own life. Ino skipped the rest of the warning and went directly to the recipe, running her finger along the column of ingredients and checking the availability of each one off in her mind. At the very bottom of the directions for mixing and simmering, she read, "Results vary in the length of time the potion's effect lasts. A potion mixed correctly will smell like turpentine and look like Indian ink." Ino made a face, but she supposed when one was desperate enough to resort to these measures, one was willing to drink it. While she didn't feel desperate enough to resort to such measures, Ino was, of course, always willing to try something new. The hard part was going to be trying to talk Sasuke into drinking something that smelled like turpentine. Maybe if she baked it into cookies.